I don't know if I have too much to offer here. I just was going to flag something more controversial because we were naming names, and like, you did a good job of flagging Robert Kraft, right? Because that's a big one that kind of just went under the rug. Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
I read an article. I think it was right around the time of his death in the Atlantic, which is just covering like the other side of that story, which is like every time we celebrate this dude's like accomplishments and his life, there is, and this is piggybacking off of what Adam said, there is somebody somewhere who's getting reminded of some fucked up shit that happened to them, and just that, like you said, that influence. You change your number on your jersey and it's gone.
Daniel
And
Tosh had a joke about that, right? He was like, we just changed his jersey number and then suddenly we forgot about the rape. We were like, he's got a miraculous jump shot, right? Like, that's all we were thinking about. He's like, yeah, but he, and again, I'm not talking to the veracity of anything, but if it's true, he ruined someone's life.
Yep.
Okay, he shoots a ball really well and can dunk really well, but kind of ruined someone's life, right? Like,
but that speaks to a hell of a point, though. With this cancel, which is, I should call it cancer, but cancel culture, is that it's you have the society that cancels, from a societal standpoint, but then you got to look at it from industry. That which society cancels, industry might not. And so if the industry doesn't cancel it, just like we keep, because especially because we see it a lot in the area of entertainment and athletes, entertainers and athletes. To where it's initially quote unquote canceled and it's out there and so forth, and the industry does everything in its power to shut it down, and so that and change the image and shift the narrative and move forward, because this individual that society wants to cancel is making the industry entirely too much money. So they're not going to cancel those dollars associated with this individual based on some kind of sentiment from society. They will work on changing the sentiment of society to keep them going. So there is some fakeness going on with that.
Ben Roethlisberger. How is this guy still in the NFL?
All of
right?
them,
Like,
across the board, because that industry, because there's money.
I'll say two things. I don't think that's an absolute. Because there's times when society has pushed the industry to changes it didn't necessarily want to, right? Where you can.
But that's because society was going to shut, because society was so upset that it's like, look, this person is going to cost us more money to keep than it is to try to clean them up.
No. Industry is the money. Society, like if we think about someone like R. Kelly, right? And this is actually where I see the value in cancel culture, right? You think about someone like R. Kelly, he's a huge star, performed at Super Bowls, he's just raping people and keeping them kidnapped for like decades, and no one's saying anything. And then eventually society gets a wind of it through this I mean, we all kind of had a small wind of it, but you really got a wind of it through this documentary. Society was like, yo, canceled, bro. You can't be doing this stuff. And then what happened after? Spotify wouldn't play, like certain, streaming services wouldn't play his music. And he was starting to like lose his endorsements and this and that across the board. So like industry followed society because industry, like you said, does want to make dollars. And if society's pushing it in the direction of, hey man, I'm not messing with this, then industry is going to follow. That's the benefit of cancel culture, right? Cancel culture can hold wealthy people, industry leaders accountable to an extent that they might not always necessarily be so. And I do agree with you, Your Highness. There's like, it's weirdly discriminate sometimes, right? Like Robert Kraft, like, why is it okay? Like, like if he had been, Robert Smith, some random guy who folds T-shirts at the Gap, we would not all be like, like something would have happened to him, right? So like, but again, I think that is where there is some benefit in cancel culture, right? Because society's coming together, industry or whatever is not getting it done, and we're all collectively saying like, nope, not okay. And then it's following it, right? And then we're like, all right, we're going to actually go after R. Kelly now because he's been stealing little girls since like the 80s and shit, and no one has said anything. Maybe we should look at this. and we start going after it that way. The interesting part to me is that where you have people like Ben Roethlisberger, Kobe Bryant, where society doesn't condemn them collectively, right? Where they're like, yeah, he did something bad, but you know what? Ben Roethlisberger could throw the shit out of a football. So
yeah, twice. I mean, and we getting into that, like, because there's holes in it. Like in that example we're using, this is twice allegation against Roethlisberger, and they did from my knowledge of it, the details I read in reports, like
they're compelling.
One of them was in the bathroom, and the undercover the off-duty police were outside the door, blocking the door.
No shame.
Like so when you see
worries.
when you see and when people hear that, they like, oh shit, like, oh, don't worry about it though. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's why to me, I'm like, I'm a person like, man, I'm with it if we're gonna be with it for real. Because I don't want to do this play back and forth. It takes a lot of energy. People are really suffering. People really feel bad. Like, this is not just some like flip a coin shit. Like, if we're gonna run it, let's do it. I'm totally for it. You know what I'm saying? But don't because then you leave gaps. You know what I'm saying? That people like, well, it depends on who you are. Then you got gaps that people say, oh, this dude was white, and this dude was black. And I see more cases on the white hand than the black. Then you got all this other shit going on. Then you like, oh, he was privileged, or she was privileged. They did this and they did that. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of this, like, for another example, a whole other industry, Duke, the University of Duke the medical department, like I think a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, got one of their former people that used to work, I think he was a scientist or somebody in the medical department that works on experiments. He became a whistleblower. I think got fired that Duke was fabricating results of scientific studies so they can get grants and money. And Duke got penalized $50 million that they had to pay back. But they did that shit like, well, we made that money off them niggas on the basketball court last year, like in a couple of games. Y'all can have that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, but they basically was getting money thrown at them because they're falsifying ideas, and they're getting status, and they're getting money to look down on people because they're making up shit. But like, it's okay. People look at that and be like, that's nothing. Do we cancel that? Is that canceled? But when you know that this is a behavior that's permeated, it's not just a Duke thing. This is a custom and a culture that's exhibited across the board. So if we're going to do it, let's shut the culture down. Well, how do we do that? Let's start addressing it. Let's start getting real about it. Because
but I don't think that's a reason to not do cancel culture, though, Your Highness, right? I don't think that's an argument. I think cancel culture is an imperfect vehicle for holding people accountable for wrongs that they may not otherwise be held accountable for. I don't think it's perfect. I don't. I know. I mean, in my opinion, Kevin Hart is actually a pretty good example of this, right? Where you got somebody who might have said something off the cuff, sometimes it's inappropriate, but he's grown, he's a supporter, he's on your team, he's here for you. You know, he recognized his wrong. I'm like, I don't know, this ain't the guy, right? This isn't really the guy, and I think collectively we agreed with that.
Did he recognize? Did he recognize his wrong, or did he not want to lose that cheese and he had to beg and apologize to just be like, please don't shut me down? You know what I'm saying? Because you could tell in the manner of the apologies and how they come and how it's designed. Like, people are kind of screaming, like they kind of swimming. I mean, they're out in the deep, like treading. We're like, please, no. No, I'm sorry. No, I know. Like,
I mean, we don't know. We don't know what's inside Kevin Hart's heart,
but,
you know, so to speak. But we can judge by his actions and the things that he's done subsequent, right? And that's the best you can go off of, right? But I do think that, you know, again, to my point, there's value in cancel culture, right?
For sure.
I can see what you're saying. I can see that. I'm just saying it's dangerous.
Is R. Kelly ever caught without cancel culture?
Does he
ever? Is R. Kelly in jail today without cancel culture? Probably not. R. Kelly still got 5 girls in his house doing all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, now. He's been doing it forever. He's still doing it without cancel culture.
How do we ensure, and I'm so sorry if I'm jumping ahead of anybody here, but I do think we're getting a little off of maybe a more important like side piece of this. How do we ensure that people who are trying to do good don't get canceled? So let me give you an example. And this may not be a real world example, but like imagine like a black man who says something inconvenient about I don't know, black culture that maybe has some truth to it or whatever, and let's say Black Twitter decides to cancel him. Or let's say somebody else says something about, a political policy or about a religion, and what they're saying could be based on fact. Like I'm thinking of somebody like Sam Harris, right, who gets listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's like hate list, and they're like, trying to bear huge financial resources to cancel somebody who is at least intellectually honest and like believes what he's saying, and is like not. I don't think is trying to just like spew hate. Like how do we parse those sorts of situations? Because so far we've talked about gaps. Somebody makes a crude joke, or we talk about celebrities raping people, whatever, and those are, I think, brighter lines to some degree. But there are a lot of uncomfortable topics that we all want to talk about, which is why this show exists. Things like immigration, things about terrorism. I can tell you about my own experience, just really briefly. I'll try to keep it concise. Probably like 6 months ago, I was probably a little careless about wading into a topic of immigration, and with somebody, and who I would later find out has a very strong feeling about that subject. And the thing derailed terribly. And the irony was, I didn't even necessarily have a position. I was almost just trying to bring the subject to the table so we could get somewhere on it. And I was open to going wherever it was going to go. But even just broaching it, I essentially was labeled, a xenophobe, and this whole thing just shut down. And I seriously thought there could have been repercussions above and beyond that, right? Like maybe she would have tried to slander me on publicly or whatever. And that to me would have been really tragic, because in my selfish feeling, I think I'm a good guy. And like, I wanted something good to come from the conversation. Like my heart was in the place of like, let's talk about the hard stuff. This is what I love to do. Again, this is why I love the program that we have. So there's a platform for it. But how do we safeguard or parse through those kind of situations?
That's a real challenge. That's a real challenge, because one thing that you have to look at is, with advancing humanity, cancel culture happens through every human advancement, every humane advancement of humanity. Martin Luther King was a victim of cancel culture, imprisoned, in jail, and hated. Just rated as the most hated man in America. But see, this is the thing: when you challenge, because to advance a society, to advance humanity, you have to challenge it, and you have people who are locked in, again, that bubble of what they believe. And like I mentioned, as far as changing the tide of the ocean, you're literally throwing rocks into the ocean trying to change the tide, and it happens after you really have to gain momentum over time. But those who are in the forefront of advancing humanity, there are many, 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 many who are going to be canceled. Oh, so many, before society eventually sees the value. Like they say, so many people are, they were ahead of their time. No, it's just that the people were behind. Because the society that we're in now is operating in what they were trying to usher in. So it's like it's a part of an unfortunate component of change and advancement, is the wanting to hold on to, no, this is where we are, this is what we have. I treasure what we are right now, but advancement is change. And it requires releasing and receiving. So that cancel piece, in order to receive the new, you have to cancel the old.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
Go ahead. You go.
No, I didn't have too much there. I think just it's a real hard question, Charles, because you think about someone like Sam Harris, and you give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's just being intellectually honest with some of his arguments, and to a degree, I think he probably is. It's hard because sometimes in his intellectual honesty, there are those ISTs, as Your Highness says, who use that intellectual conversation to justify not so intellectual, bad stuff, right? And so it becomes really difficult, right? You know, to like, because I do think you're right? Someone like Sam Harris probably just comes at it like just 100% straightforward. You know, he says things I don't like a lot of times. He says things I do like a lot of time, but I do understand like the reasoning behind his thinking on almost everything.
And I think we appreciate,
it,
even when we disagree, that we're getting right to it. We're not wasting any time.
Right, and I do believe that like I can see him getting to that point without some, you know, bigoted view in the background, right? Like just logically progressing through this through a reasonable way, and I 100% get that. The problem is that like when people like him have those make those arguments, like I said, sometimes racists get behind them or bigots or whatever, and they use those things outside of this intellectual domain to justify really shitty things, right? And that's one point. And then two, when it comes specifically to, you know, when it comes to Black Twitter, right? You talk about Black Twitter and canceling and stuff like that. You know, it's difficult, I think, for Black people because like we are like one really. I mean, we're like a pretty monolithic block, right? Like we vote the same, we go the same way. Like, of course, there's some discrepancies here and there, but like we collectively have like, you know, a lot of shared beliefs based on like our experiences that don't allow all the time for that much flexibility and interpretation in the way of events. And I'm guilty of that myself too. And so when you hear, let's take like some, you know, like I don't know, like Larry Elder or one of these, you know, be bad. One of these Uncle Tom black dudes. One of these Uncle Tom black. Honestly, it's hard for me to like listen to what he says sometimes, right? Because it's like diametrically opposed to everything that I'm convinced in myself is true. And so while he may be coming from like a good, legitimate intellectual place trying to advance Black people, it's hard for me to like receive it in that way.
Yeah. And I only tried to bring up the example of somebody like that because so that there'd be an ounce of possibility of them not being racist. Because if I, you know, in the other example, it's not as it can be a brighter line or a grayer line, I guess. But I you still answered it really well.
And this why, like I say, it's just like it's double-edged sword. Like you say, in principle, you know, you look at it, you're like, okay, sounds like a good thing. You know what I'm saying? Like you see people doing a lot of pocket shit. Like, hey, we're not really dealing with no shit like that. You know, but it's just the fact that it's so dangerous too that it could be weaponized. You know what I'm saying? Like people turn it into something else, and it's just these little pockets
without context. Yeah, without enough like on the front end. It's the littlest thing. A feeling gets hurt, and it's like, yo, let's get the mob and let's have a character lynching. And it's too quick a lot of times, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I tend to lean, if I had to on paper check yes or no, I would check a no because I'm like, man, we need to straighten this shit out. You know what I'm saying? And I think it can't happen just like anything. When you want to straighten something out, you make the time in your day, you come together and you make it work, and you put something together that, to be clear, this might take whatever time, but you make an effort. You can't say I gotta go to work, I'll holler at you on the weekend. You know what I'm saying? That means it's not that important then. You know what I'm saying? Like if we want to do it, we're men and women, we're adults, you know, let's get together and do it. Let's come to something that we can clearly show that, like, because it's these gaps in between that people are using this like in another manner. And I'm like, man, this is only gonna make it worse to me, because now everybody just got arrows up, bows pulled back, and they're just kind of like, you know, what you want to do? You want to shoot at me? I'm gonna shoot. I'm gonna say something. You say, yo, you did this, you did that, you stepped on the crack. You weren't supposed to step on the crack. Like it's like all kind of like, what's going on now? Like like you say, like I think Charles, you mentioned like it starts out in a good place. And this happens a lot of time with people, period. And even I figure like the whole religion thing, it starts out in a good place. You know what I'm saying? But through time, like people just turn shit to something else, and this shit's turned real quick because it's like the mold right now. It's the mold of society. Like it's a part of like the fabric right now. Like so, you know, that's my position.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was me or Steve or not, but I'll be first. Either way, it works out. I'd like to offer up a hypothetical rule for determining how cancellations should work. And I'm curious to see how you guys think. And of course, this is like academic, it won't necessarily just catch on in society and then it just all works out. But I think we can have these high-minded conversations, and I'm hoping the listeners maybe can take something positive away from this. But like, I think asking ourselves if there is a curiosity and or an intellectual honesty in what people are trying to do, if you go in with that lens when judging something controversial somebody's saying, if you can see there's a curiosity or a follow-up to something, and it's not just trying to close the door, then we should be more slow to cancel. Somebody says something that's like outside of your comfort zone. Let's say I come right now and I'm saying, no more immigrants in America. Before you cancel me, where's he going at with this? You know what I mean? Like, is it coming from a place of like curiosity, or is it coming from a place of something negative? And if you're not providing that context and you don't seem to have that goodwill, those are kind of like, I think, bright lines to operate within.
Yeah, with that, like even using that scenario, if someone says something so broad as no more immigrants coming into America, and my response is, yes, we should still allow immigrants into America. Now, because you got two extreme, not really extremes, but you just have two opposing views now. At this point, we can cancel or continue. And because it's so broad, there's room to continue, like you may mention. It's a thing of, okay, where are we going? Which way? It's like, again, for me, it's about healing humanity. If I see where you're going in a place where you want to truly hurt humanity and believe that is good, then there's not too much leeway that I have left for you. The point I was going to make previously was that a lot of times when people speak, they're searching for validation. They're really not, and where a lot of the emotion comes from is because they're not truly solid in what they believe. They're truly not. Because one thing about being really truly solid in what you believe, there's levels of offense that doesn't happen. It's like right now, there's certain things that people can say to me based on race that's not going to bother me based on where I've studied and have come to an understanding of based on my ancestry. So it's a thing of where it's like, okay, there's some things I can tell you to bring you on board if you want to come, because there was a time where if you said it, I'm fighting, hands down. There's no two ways about it. It's a fight. But where I am now in my life, over these years and the maturing with the information that I've allowed the information to mature in me, I'm not searching for validation when I speak on what I speak with, or when I give a point that counters someone else's point. I'm not still. You don't have to agree with me. So a lot of times people are seeking validation for what they're saying, and because you don't validate them and validate what they're saying, they want to cancel you because they still want to hold on to what they think is valid.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
I agree. I mean, like I said, it also ties in so much with different ethnic backgrounds of people. Like, from an aspect of from an angle like just Black society, at least speaking from my area and people around me, it's like we want to cancel the whole culture. We really want to cancel the culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, because this shit is just not working. It's not good. And then you kind of flare up like, that's not important. This is important. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is important. This is how we address it because everything else is good. But this is not good right here. This dude doing this or this woman doing this, this is not good. Yeah, you got a problem and that's what's happening to you, but that ain't that serious. So for me, it's always looking at it in a different aspect. And the slide I like I say, I don't want to hear it to a degree because I'm like, you picking and choosing, and it's something that people have been screaming out to be like, hey, what's up? This is inappropriate. What's happening? What y'all doing? It's like, no, that's cool. And even to this day, that's still cool. But this over here, no, that's not cool. So it's like, come on, man. It's like, what's going on? Because I'm looking at it not even about the subject. I'm looking at it about a pattern. I'm looking at it about like you just omitting people, you're omitting feelings, you picking and choosing, you're in power, you're in control. This is the kind of same shit. It just kind of ties back in. It brings up all those feelings because you got to remember there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of depression going on. So this is contributing to how people think too. So that's bringing up those feelings in certain instances when we want to point out this or point out that, and then we like, well, what about this? What about that? And like, oh, nah, you good. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, well, I don't deal this big shit insensitive to other shit. I don't want to talk about that shit either. Then fuck that. It makes you like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like a lot of times, I feel that overall this can hurt more than help. Because on paper and for the subject that's being discussed, yeah, that's pretty. I agree. Overall, the deciding factor, which a couple of y'all throw questions about, how do we decide? How do we get the line? How do we see what's this or that? These deciding factors are controlled by some type of group or force or whatever you want to make influence that is still permeating a kind of behavior that's picking and choosing to scrutinize and try some people and not others. You know what I'm saying? This is kind of like, this is the way of the world. You know, so it's like, it's a halfway. It's some hypocritical shit, and it's not really even contained with the effort put forth to really deal with shit in the right kind of way, because it's like it flares up, then it goes down, and it flares up, and it goes down, and we're just kind of accepting the shit like, that's what at least we get baby steps, and in a way that's good. You're making progress, but we can do more. We're deciding not to. Collectively, I'm talking about society. We can do more. We're deciding not to. So.
Yeah, look, your proposed solution I think is theoretically nice, but I don't think it's like, if that's the way things worked, absolutely, right? Like, I think that conversations would be advanced, but I think from like a practical perspective, that's probably not the way any of us are wired, right? We all, I remember actually Sam Harris talking about like the psychology of tribalism and how like our cognitive biases are like designed to like evade our awareness of them, right? So, we are. I just used myself as an example, right? With Larry Elder, who is like a conservative author and attorney, who I always call Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom. But and even as I sit and I hear myself saying that, like, maybe I'm stuck within my own cognitive biases, and I'm just like, by definition, not aware of them, right? And I'm not open to seeing this in a way that's different. And I think we all have that sense of psychological tribalism to an extent where, our minds, we showed that on this call today, right? As we talked about, Jews in an ashtray or this or that. Like, we all have like our own like psychological tribalism, and as long as like that exists, which I think will always exist, there's always going to be some difficulty in having some of these conversations, right? Because we're always going to be like, like your friend with the immigration issue. They don't know. She's not even aware, or he or she is not even aware that she's seeing it so differently from you, right? And so that like collision was almost like, it's going to happen. And like the work of rewiring your mentality to think differently from that is incredibly hard, and most people are not going to do that. That's just not real.
Yeah,
it's just not real.